Vacancy Legal Recruitment, a refreshingly unique and personal talent agency developed specifically for legal. Dedicated to the sector and with extensive experience working across legal services and legal technology, we bridge the gap between your requirements and top-tier legal talent. Get in touch today and say hello at vacancy.co.uk.
You're listening to the Today's Wills and Probate podcast, one of the leading sources of information for the wills and probate sector. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todayswillsandprobate.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Wills and Probate podcast. Today we're talking all about genealogy. We have Eileen Lavelle on the podcast, Regional Head at Anglia Research. It's great to have you on the podcast. I'm really interested in this one, Eileen, because as we were saying before we started recording, genealogy is a little bit Marmite, isn't it? Some people love it, some people not so keen, but it must be fascinating going back and digging into people's pasts.
It is. It's a wonderful job to be in. I can't believe I get paid for it. You talk to all sorts of people in all sorts of walks of life. Most people are interested in their family history, especially if you tell them about somebody who's left some money and they're going to get a share of it, which is always good. But yeah, it's one of the fascinating things. You talk about what you do to people and they go, oh, what a great job.
It's quite an easy one to explain to people, isn't it? I know I've done jobs in the past where I feel sometimes as though I've confused people more after I've told them what I do than by actually explaining. Tell us in the first instance about yourself. What is a regional head at Anglia Research and what does a day in the life of Eileen Lavelle look like?
Different every day. It's a brilliant job to have. I came into this job sort of slightly by accident. My very first job when I left school, I worked in the local studies library at Manchester Central Library, pre-computers, looking at genealogy, doing genealogy all through books and microfilms. Fast forward, I was working for the CSA and I saw this job advertised. I'd never heard of the job before. What is a probate genealogist? Never heard of it. Met Peter Turvey, my boss, had a chat with him and started the job. So what it is, most of my work is probate genealogy. So it's looking for relatives of people who have died without leaving a will and have left some money, some assets. So that's my main sort of role, but I do lots of instructed work for solicitors, all sorts of things. So one day is never like another day. You have no idea what you're going to come to when you start work in the morning, which is great. You don't want a job where it's the same thing every day. And this is a brilliant job.
Tell us about how the work comes into you and how you sort of have that relationship with the firm.
It mostly is by email. I do get the odd phone call, but mostly by email. We get a lot of referrals. A solicitor's spoken to another solicitor's and they said, oh, use Anglia, they're great. Had an email yesterday saying, could you track down the son of the lady that's died? Got two sisters, but he's disappeared off the face of the earth. That was one. And then another one would be if solicitors are administering an estate, but they're missing some beneficiaries. So they want us to trace those. Or somebody's died intestate, which is mostly the work I do. And they want a family tree producing and a report with all the contact details of all the beneficiaries so that they can then administer the estate. Some of the beneficiaries will be known, but the majority won't be. So most of them are by email, a quick email. This is roughly what we want. And then we can give them a quote and then get on with the work.
I love that story, and I've heard it so many times from will writers and from solicitors as well, where something comes out of the woodwork. There's another family, there's a child, I don't know. I mean, you must have some stories.
Everybody has a story. Everybody has a story. I mean, what we were talking about, where you said, half the family went up north and some was down in Cornwall. There's all sorts of stories. We've got all sorts. Did one fairly recently at the end of last year. A lady had passed away in Manchester. Solicitors had instructed us to trace the relatives. I couldn't find this woman anywhere. Her name didn't come up at all. So I thought, well, I wonder if she's married. So I'll have a look at the surname, which was quite unusual. I couldn't find any person with the first name marrying her surname. So In the end, I found one marriage in Manchester with the surname, so I ordered it. It came back with a first name of the lady, which was different. So I did a freedom of information request to the NHS, which you can do, and it came back with a different name, correct person, the right date of birth. So I started to look at that. She'd come from Ireland. And then I started to flick through a few newspaper records, and there's this big article in the Manchester Evening News, big notice, we are searching for Olga. Her family were looking for her, and she'd obviously got married, had nothing to do with them for whatever reason, the rest of the family, and she'd lived in Manchester all her life. She'd never got back in touch with her family. So it was sad, really, because I had to then tell some of the relatives that she'd passed away, but they said at least we know what happened to her. We had no clue as to what happened to her at all, and without our involvement they would never have known.
I guess giving people that sense of closure sometimes is a difficult part of the job, but I guess a reassuring part of the role.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I've had to tell people that mum's died, dad's died, a child's died, a brother or sister have died, and it's for no particular reason people lose touch with each other, especially perhaps if somebody's gone into a care home, then they've moved care home, and it's really difficult to get hold of, track down people if they're in the care system, because of course the Data Protection Act, they can't tell you if they're there. It's really difficult for people to track them down. So quite often if they use a company like ours, then we can find those people for them, which, you know, there's just not that information out there for the general public to track down people.
That rather neatly leads me on to a question that I know I'm sure a number of listeners have, which is how on earth do you do the job? I'm assuming that a lot of it's done online now. So I'm intrigued to understand sort of how that works. But take me back to 16 years ago as well, because it must have been different then.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, a lot of information online now, far more than there ever was. Lots of scans of baptisms, marriages and burials that Ancestry have done and various other places. Most of my life is sitting in front of the computer. But 16 years ago, I was still going into libraries and looking at stuff, you know, on microfilm or in books. I still do it to a certain extent. To some places, some libraries and so on do have things that you can go and look at that you can't get online. So you do go and do that. But mainly everything is online. But it's knowing those sites where you can access the information. If you don't know the sites there, you can't go and look at it. So my speciality is sort of Greater Manchester area, because I used to work in the library in Manchester, and I know all the areas. So I know all the little odd websites that you can go and look at for burial records or census returns or baptisms or whatever, newspaper records. So I've got more things at my fingertips than the general public would have to find people and to trace and do family trees.
I just have images of you, I don't know, with those humongous books that you used to kind of flip over and, you know, magnifying glass and all sorts, trying to find out this information.
Manchester particularly have got a lot. They're the diocesan repository for baptism, marriage and burial books from churches. All of those original documents go into the library, but mostly they're now scanned. A lot of them are online or they're on microfilm, so you don't actually get to see the books anymore, which is a shame, because I love looking at the old stuff and turning a page over and you're going to find what you want. Far quicker online now, but not so much fun going to the original sources.
And how much does things like social media have an impact on your role? I mean, Facebook as an example is a very fertile searching ground, isn't it? For anybody who's ever sort of looking for long lost university friends or something along those lines, you often find them on there, don't you?
Yeah, it's quite useful, Facebook, because quite often people will put their friends on there. So if you're not sure you've got the right person, you can go and look at the friends, put, say, their surname in and see if there's anybody else comes up, and then you know you've got the right person. I do message people on Facebook, but of course it does look a very strange job I have. It's a very weird job. And so, you know, you get an email or a message from me to say, you know, I'm looking for so-and-so. And I do try and give as much information as I can so that people do know that I am a genuine person. I give all the website details and everything. But Facebook itself is really good. And just Googling people. all sorts of stuff comes up. I was just got a new matter today, and I googled this man, and it's come up with he was murdered with rat poison over in Wales, and his body was burned, and he's the father of my deceased person. And that gave me some more information, so that was really good.
There must be times, though, and for all the digging that you do and all the rest of it, that you just simply can't find the person that you're looking for. What are firms' options when that happens?
You can take out a missing beneficiary indemnity insurance. We call it an MBI, and it's like any indemnity. It covers you in case, in case a beneficiary comes forward. So in the main, we do what we call comfort MBIs, which are, we think we've done all the research and it's all correct and we've found everybody, but just in case there's an illegitimate child out there, or somebody's adopted somebody in that we don't know about and nobody in the family's talked about, you can take out a comfort MBI and it just covers you for anybody else that was not known of through the research. But you can also do specific MBIs as well for people that you can't trace. You'd have to say when they were last seen, if the family knows about them, and what their share of the estate will be. And then we can get a quote for an MBI, given how much they're going to be due. We can do that quite easily. You can get the quote within 20 minutes or so, and it's all done. And then it's belt and braces really. So a solicitor's got that in the back in the file, and then if anybody does come forward, they know that nobody in the family is going to be liable.
Have you got any indication as to what proportion of cases really need MBI of any description?
I suppose it depends how confident you are in your research. I had an email the other day from a gentleman who was administering his cousin's estate, and he's had some research done by another company, and he went to get an MBI quote, and they said the research isn't good enough, family tree is not good enough, and so he's come to us and we've given him what they need because we know what's needed for an MBI. I would say probably most cases perhaps won't need an MBI because you've traced everybody, you've spoken to the family, but it's just as well to take it out, to be frank, because you don't know if great auntie Nellie had a child at 16 that was fostered with so-and-so and nobody's ever talked about it, and that was in the 1930s and it's all been forgotten. You've really got no idea. It's very difficult to find illegitimate children unless you know of them. So it's probably just as well to take out a comfort MBI. It's usually only a couple of £100. It's money well spent, just in case anyone does come forward.
Where's the line between the missing beneficiary insurance and your own personal indemnity insurance, Eileen?
Okay, so the missing beneficiary indemnity insurance, the person whose name goes on the grant is the person who's liable for anybody coming forward. So it's to protect that person, the MBI. So it's not to protect us as the research company, but it's to protect that person who's taken out the grant. We have our own liability insurance, of course, but for an MBI, it's to cover the grantee.
And by extension, it covers the firm from any comeback from the grantee.
Yeah, it does. We say that we're happy with our research and we've done everything we can, but there are going to be little anomalies out there, as I say, like illegitimate children or adopted in children that just aren't talked about, known about. So you can't be 100% certain you've found everybody. You can be 99% certain, but there'll be that little tiny bit in the back of your mind, well, did so and so go off and have a child?
And I suppose if you translate that into society as it is today, with blended families, more contentious matters, those things that we know are happening within wills and probate, and of course the great wealth transfer, it's a topic of conversation as well. I'm guessing your work is going to become more complicated in the future, and some of this needs to be a bit more considered as part of the process.
Yeah, especially those families who parents aren't married. There are various children. Some If the money's come through dad, but dad's not on the birth certificate, you can't prove that you're related to the person who's passed away. And I've come across this a number of times. Mum and dad might have one child or two children before they get married. Only mum's on the birth certificate, but dad's, taken the children on. They've had a whole load more children, and the later children don't know that the first two children aren't their, illegitimate to all intents and purposes. And so when the money comes down and they can't prove that dad was their dad, and only the other children get the money, it's only going to get worse, I would think, more complicated, shall we say, where people aren't on birth certificates. And people move about a lot more as well than they used to. You're going to find people who are born in Manchester, get married in Oxford, end up in Cornwall, and you're trying to find marriages for those people, or children have been born in different areas. You've got people who are in the armed forces who might have been born abroad. We can trace most people, but it's going to get more complicated because people are so much more mobile now.
And we were talking just before we started recording about you being instructed on a case where you were doing some research in Poland as well. That international element is probably more prevalent now than it's ever been.
Yeah, we get a lot of instructed matters for people who were born in Jamaica or in Europe coming through, especially in Europe. But we have specialists that we use. We have our own designated people within the company who deal with those types of matters. And we can trace most people. As I say, we have lots of partner companies that can help us out with research abroad, all sorts of countries. And we do reciprocal work for them, of course. We can trace most people who've gone abroad. I've got one at the moment who I know went to Canada as a home child. I don't know if you know about home children. Lots of people who were orphans were sent to Canada. So we've got this little boy who's 11 in 1913. He's got a sister in England, but his sister's older, so she's working. Mum and dad have died, and the little boy is sent to Canada. It wasn't a great life. Most of them were put to work and so on, but he seems to have stayed there. He was certainly there in 1921. But he is an uncle of a deceased person I'm trying to track down. So I've got to now go and do some more research on home children in Canada and see if I can find him. But he's got a really common name. I'm going to have a bit of trouble. He's Frederick Taylor, and there's thousands of them. So I'm just hoping perhaps he might have come back to England perhaps before 1960, so he'll for a visit, so he might be on an immigration record. There's lots of things you can look at to track people down.
Are there countries that are particularly well served for records? And we might decry the UK system, but actually I suspect that we're pretty well served for public records.
I think we're really good. Canada and Australia are quite difficult to deal with because of their data protection laws. But again, we have our own specialists there, so we can trace them. Again, in Europe, we're very well served, and in the Caribbean, most places you can trace people. But I would say that the UK is very well served. Births, marriages, and deaths are on indexes, public documents, wills are public documents. In Scotland again. Ireland's more difficult just because of the amount of records that were burnt in the Troubles and so on. But again, we have one of my colleagues works in Dublin, and so he deals with all our Irish research. So if you have anything that you're not sure of and you think, I don't know where to go with this because they're born in Poland or whatever, you can come to us and we can give you a bit of advice. And then if we can help you.
It's been a bit of a wander round genealogy, and it's almost certainly as interesting as you make it sound, Eileen, albeit that it's obviously a passion of yours as well. I've got a couple of questions before we finish, and I'd like you to end, if you don't mind, on a story that you'd be prepared to share. But before I do that, what other services do genealogists provide that listeners might not be aware of? I think most people are probably aware of MBI of some description, although it's been helpful to understand what you can and can't do with it. But what else does listeners need to be thinking about, or what other options are there for them through genealogy services?
Well, we can do divorce searches, which is very handy. You do need to have the decree absolute, the date of the divorce, if you're dealing with probate. We can do international bankruptcy searches as well, which is something that people don't realise can be done. So those are something that we do. It's a straightforward thing. We can do those for people. And we have a free family tree verification service as well. So if a solicitor has been given a family tree and gone, this is everybody on the family tree, we can have a look at it and say, well, actually, there's another 4 kids there that they're not telling you about. So you can't take research at face value. I would always get a professional just to check it. So those are some of the things we can help with.
And to finish with, you must have a story that you can share with listeners that perhaps tickles us, or makes us think about, well, maybe we might think about using genealogy services in this scenario.
I've got hundreds of stories you wouldn't believe, but one of them, quite a sad story really. A lady died in Manchester, illegitimate daughter of someone who was an only child of parents, and Grandad disappeared. Grandad disappeared about 1915, and I found had got quite an unusual name, and he was a bricklayer, so it's quite an unusual mix, so you can usually pick people up. And I found him going out to Canada in 1915, where he enlisted in the Canadian Army after leaving his wife and daughter at home. And then in 1919 he comes back, but doesn't come back to Manchester. He goes to Liverpool, where he bigamously marries and has a son, and still doesn't go back to Manchester. Then the little family then go back to Canada, where they then immigrate into the States and have another 6 children. About 1935, something like that, he divorces his wife on the grounds that she's deserted him. Which when I read it, I just thought, how could you even say that? You know it's not right. And then they get this family, then he and his bigamous wife then get married again. My lady who died, she had no other living relations apart from Grandad's children, who were half-blood siblings to her mother. And they took all her money. And when I got hold of them, they were all living in the States. I got hold of them. They went, "Oh, Dad wasn't like that." And Dad actually was. They still weren't very keen, but they took the money. But it was a fascinating family tree to find, with this man coming and going and bigamously marrying and all the rest of it. And you wouldn't have found that out without using a professional. You just think, oh, he's disappeared. Life is very strange.
You could imagine that sort of scenario would have been easier in those days than, the days of ever-present internet and social media and all that kind of business. But
and
I mean, it still happens now, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, things like divorces. People couldn't afford to get divorced, and you could only get divorced on certain grounds. So people would just move or change their name. You come across that quite a lot.
And in 1915, Liverpool and Manchester might as well have been the other side of the world. Such was the distances that people didn't particularly travel back then compared to now.
Well, exactly. But I just feel sorry for his wife and daughter, not knowing what had happened to him. They've got no idea. You don't know whether he kept in touch with them or whether he didn't, but I'm assuming he didn't. And so she would never have been able to get divorced because she didn't know what happened to her husband. Stories, lots of them. Going from that to a gentleman that died in Cornwall, and he left £1.5 million. But I had to find 72 beneficiaries. To somebody whose very first case, mum had died. I went to see the son, and he wasn't that bothered, and took the money. And that's my very, very first case. So there's all sorts out there.
Well, as the time that we have for the discussion today, it's been great to have you on the podcast, sharing your stories and also some insight into a day in the life of a genealogist. Thanks so much for joining.
Thanks very much, David. It's been very enjoyable.
The Today's Wills and Probate podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todayswillsandprobate.co.uk. My thanks to Eileen. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Wills and Probate podcast, one of the leading sources of information for the wills and probate sector. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todayswillsandprobate.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.